My father refused to walk me down the aisle because his golden child had a party that day. But when I found a replacement after a long search, he suddenly called me desperately. I always knew that my parents loved my older sister Vicky more than me. She was the planned child, and I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. Perhaps they didn't even want me, but they decided to keep the pregnancy. My mother's parents died before I was born, but my father's parents were alive. They played a significant role in my upbringing, providing the love and support that I often lacked from my own parents. I remember many instances when my parents left me with my grandparents and took Vicky on trips. When I was little, it didn't bother me, but as I grew older, I began to understand how unfair it was. My problem was not only with my parents, but also with Vicky. Although I didn't hold a grudge against her, I couldn't help feeling like an outsider in the family. She knew this, and did everything to make me feel unwelcome in my own home. She always competed with me for everything: grades, parental attention, even the smallest achievements. It was a constant struggle for recognition, and I always ended up on the losing side because my parents preferred her. As a result, I felt worthless, and our relationship was more of a rivalry than sisterly love. One day, Vicky wanted to befriend a group of girls, but being a nerd, she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls was in my art class, and I introduced Vicky to the rest. We started hanging out together. Vicky was so jealous that she made our parents talk to me to include her in our group. Every time I was with them, she tried to cause a scene, but my mom called me selfish, and my dad said that Vicky was my sister and I should take care of her. Reluctantly, I agreed and introduced Vicky to the other girls. Now Vicky didn't have many friends, so she seemed too clingy. She always tried to impress the girls in our group, often causing irritation. Despite her efforts, it was hard for her to find her place among them, and the tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls was interested in a guy, and Vicky approached him and told him that the girl was in love with him. He laughed because he wasn't interested and told everyone about it, which humiliated the girl. After that, the girls directly told me that they didn't want me to bring Vicky to our gatherings. I agreed, but Vicky didn't accept it. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls didn't want to have anything to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't hang out with those bad girls because I was her sister and should protect her. I refused and said it was her fault that they didn't want to be her friends. But my parents, as always, supported her. They lectured me about how Vicky didn't have bad intentions, that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky, but if they didn't forgive her, then I should stay away from them too. I refused and stood my ground. I liked hanging out with them, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to risk our friendship. I told my parents that I had already been through enough, and that it wasn't my responsibility to find Vicky friends. My parents got angry and didn't talk to me for several weeks, but I'm glad I didn't give in. This group of girls remained my friends to this day and became like sisters to me. I cried with them, laughed with them, and shared the most significant moments of my life. This wasn't the only reason Vicky started to hate me. There was another incident with a guy she was in love with. I didn't even know about him, but he invited me to the prom. I politely declined because I was already planning to go with another guy the first liked more. Later, when Vicky found out about this, she caused a real scandal, telling our parents how I always took what she liked and flirted with the guy, knowing she had been in love with him for several months. She called me terrible names that no one should say to their sister, and told our parents that she wished I wasn't her sister. Mom took her side, saying that I had done wrong, and that as a sister, I should respect the girl code. I tried to explain that I didn't even like that guy, and that I had declined his invitation, but Vicky wouldn't let it go. She continued to insist that I always took everything she liked. I think she knew that the guy would have rejected her anyway and just wanted to vent her anger on me. One day, Dad took me out for ice cream, saying he wanted to spend time with his daughter. It was the first time, and I was very happy, but he started asking me a bunch of questions. Whether my boyfriend and I were having sex, if my boyfriend was from a good family, if we were using drugs. I was surprised by his questions and asked what he meant. Then Dad told me that Vicky had made up stories and told our parents that I was using drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. It was a complete lie, and I showed Dad my phone to prove that Vicky was lying. Later, when Dad confronted Vicky about all these lies, she tried to justify herself, saying that no one our age just hangs out with a boyfriend and that I was hiding something from everyone. I was so angry that I yelled at her for causing unnecessary problems and told her that it wasn't my fault she didn't have a boyfriend, but she should stop interfering in my life. Vicky didn't accept this and hit me. It happened unexpectedly, as she had never been physically aggressive before. My nose started bleeding when I fell to the floor, clutching my face in pain. My parents took me to the hospital, and the whole time they begged me not to file a complaint against Vicky, saying how it would ruin her life, while I sat in the back seat holding my face. Vicky didn't even apologize. Later, when a nurse asked me about the incident, I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services. My parents were furious that I had involved Child Protective Services, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me and that her actions were an accident. In the end, Vicky was released, but the authorities warned my parents that they would monitor our situation if there were any other incidents. As you can imagine, Vicky was very upset, as were my parents. Later, my parents told me that they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. Mom started crying and said how I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. Dad's disappointment was obvious. He always spoke words full of reproach when asking about my decision to escalate the situation. I firmly told them that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my home when I saw that Vicky had been officially warned. My parents talked to her separately, and since then, she stopped talking to me. I prefer this because I don't want her constantly hovering around me or trying to interfere in my life. When my grandparents found out about this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them until the end of school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, and I moved in with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved there. The remaining days of school went well, and I created lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited me or called during this time. I knew they were happy with their favorite daughter, so I never tried to contact them. Although it hurt that they could so easily reject me as if I meant nothing. When I graduated from school, my parents made that day about Vicky and didn't even congratulate me or approach me. I felt like a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for their obvious favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather said to them, but later, Dad awkwardly approached me and congratulated me. Later, I found out that I had been accepted to a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about this because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I told my grandparents about it, and they invited me to dinner at a nice restaurant. After dinner, my grandmother posted photos of me on her Facebook account, writing a long post about how proud she was of me for being an excellent student. Our relatives soon found out about this and joined in the congratulations. Perhaps someone among them could have told my parents, who didn't know about all this, but instead of being happy, my mom called me the next day to say that Vicky had locked herself in her room and was crying because she hadn't been accepted to any university, and that I was deliberately making my sister feel bad about my grades by telling our relatives about it. I was completely crushed that my own mother could accuse me of such a thing. That was the last time I spoke to her. My grandparents helped me move into the university dorm, as my high school boyfriend's university was far away, and we broke up. So I entered university alone. The breakup was tough, but I was excited about the opportunity to meet new people. It was here that I met Rob, and we were both freshmen and spent half our days in the library. Rob was different from anyone I had known before. He is a quiet person and loves to study, which was similar to me, and we quickly found common interests in our love for learning. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship grew into something deeper, and I realized that I had feelings for Rob that went beyond simple friendship. Being an extrovert, I was quite straightforward about my feelings for Rob, and was surprised to find out that he felt the same way. We started dating, and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents met Rob and just adore him. I met Rob's parents, who literally treat me like their own daughter. In some cases, Rob's mom even confessed to me how she always wanted a daughter. So she is glad that Rob found such a wonderful person as me. Honestly, this is the first time I have been surrounded by relatives who appreciate me and don't hold grudges against me. I told Rob stories from my childhood, and he listens and knows how things stand with Vicky. Over these past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me, except for sending me an occasional birthday wish if they remembered. But that's all. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me during a hike to our usual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see him nervous as he proposed, and I had no doubts when I accepted his proposal. I posted photos of our engagement on Instagram and also told my grandparents about it. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. Perhaps the news spread because my parents called me out of the blue to congratulate me. I thought it was just a casual conversation, as we hadn't spoken in several years. They asked me about my life, my job, my apartment, before my dad directly asked me if he could walk me down the aisle. I was surprised by his sudden question, as just moments before, he didn't even know which company I worked for. I told him that I hadn't thought about it yet, and Dad said it would be shameful if I didn't invite him, and that others would ask questions about it. So it would be better if he walked me down the aisle. I told my parents that I wasn't even sure if I would invite them to my wedding, as we hadn't kept in touch. But this upset my parents. Mom started talking about how disappointed she was with my response, emphasizing the importance of family and traditions. She continued to say how they would always be my parents, no matter what, and that I should leave the past behind. Part of me was ready to listen to my parents and accept Dad's offer because I wanted our relationship to be restored. But another part of me was doubtful, fearing possible disappointments and pain. However, I was about to start a new chapter of my life in a few months. So I told Dad that he could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed thrilled. During the wedding preparations, I contacted my high school friends, with whom I have always kept in touch, despite the physical distance that arose between us due to our careers. I told them how I wanted our group to reunite, and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many tears of joy and congratulations, and without hesitation, they accepted my invitation to be part of my wedding party, as it was an opportunity for all of us to reunite. We all planned to go to Las Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends. My friends and I posted a ton of photos from the party, and overall, everyone had a great time. However, when I returned home, my parents called me to tell me how disappointed they were that I hadn't invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them that there was no way I could include Vicky in my bachelorette party, and that I didn't want her to be part of my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked what I meant. So I clarified that Vicky's actions, especially her history of lies and gossip, had deeply hurt me and made me distrust her intentions. I couldn't imagine inviting her to such an intimate and joyful event as my bachelorette party, knowing that her presence would make my party less joyful. I also informed my parents that this was the reason she wasn't invited to my wedding. Hearing this, my parents lost their composure. They complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding, and that it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They said that Vicky was thrilled to meet me, knowing that I was getting married, and I was confused and asked my parents what gave her that idea, as we hadn't spoken in a long time. But my parents ignored my concerns, saying that sisters don't do that. I told them that they should understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated after everything that happened. I just don't feel comfortable having her as part of my wedding. She never once apologized to me for everything she made me go through. However, my parents largely ignored my words. Mom continued to say how she wanted everything to be resolved, and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. Dad insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and that this would ultimately affect my wedding. However, I knew it was better not to give in to their demands. So I didn't give in to them. I told them that it was fine if people talked behind my back and questioned my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I love and trust during my wedding. Mom then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this, and also tried to use the mother-in-law card, saying that my future mother-in-law and father-in-law would judge me for being so cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and his parents know the dynamics of my family, and that none of them would care whether Vicky was present or not. They pressured me, emphasizing the importance of family unity and forgiveness. But I didn't budge an inch because I wasn't willing to sacrifice my own well-being to appease others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us holding on to our own points of view, and my parents said they needed to think about it, and we ended our conversation there. I told my grandparents about this because I felt a little guilty about the confrontation with my parents, and they fully supported me. My grandparents told me that I shouldn't force myself to invite someone I didn't want to see there, and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since then, I have felt a little better about my decision, and have been distracted by wedding preparations, as my wedding is approaching. Last week, my dad called me to tell me that he had thought a lot, and that he and Mom would no longer be attending the wedding. Before I could react, he continued, saying that this also meant that he would not be walking me down the aisle. I asked if there was a specific reason, and he informed me that Vicky would soon be moving to a new place that my parents helped her find. And since I had excluded her from the wedding, she decided to have a housewarming party on the same day, so they would go there instead of my wedding. I couldn't believe he was telling me this because he wasn't even invited in the first place, let alone walking me down the aisle. But he thought he should tell me that he decided not to do it. However, the idea that my own sister's housewarming party took priority over my wedding was a cruel blow, a continuation of what I had felt for many years. I just told him that I understood and hung up. Although I tried to be strong in front of my dad, the pain of rejection hit me deeply. When I told Rob, he was furious at how insensitive my parents could be, especially after they themselves had insisted on being invited. It was he who gave me the idea to ask my grandfather, as he and my grandmother had been there in my life more than my parents. I agreed, so I called my grandparents and asked if they would walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't hold back tears when I asked my grandfather, "You and Grandma have always been there for me," I said with a tremble in my voice. "You are more than just grandparents to me. You are like parents, and I can't imagine anyone else being by my side on my wedding day." Grandpa didn't hesitate before saying yes. He said how he would be honored to walk me down the aisle, and, unlike my parents, wouldn't let me down. His words comforted me, and at that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. With my grandparents by my side, I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me as I am with all my flaws. I also talked to my father-in-law about this, and Rob's parents assured me that they didn't care whether my parents were present or not, and that, regardless of their presence, they were looking forward to witnessing and supporting our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from Dad. I called him back, thinking it was an emergency, and when he answered, he asked if it was true that Grandpa would be walking me down the aisle. I said yes, it was true, and then Dad got angry, saying how disrespectful it was that I had asked Grandpa. I reminded him that he had decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why he was so upset. Dad continued to yell at me about how he and Mom were only trying to make me see the errors of my ways, and that they thought that by refusing the invitation, they would teach me a lesson. He continued to talk about how he and Mom had raised me and paid for my food and education, so Grandpa had no right to replace him. I tried to explain to him that Grandpa had been there for me in ways he and Mom never were, but he didn't want to listen. He also told me how I had only pushed everyone away and that it was all my fault. I don't think I did anything wrong in this situation. Maybe everyone would have done the same. But since the subreddit requires asking a question, am I wrong for asking my grandfather to walk me down the aisle instead of my father? Update 1. Many have spoken, and most have said that I am not wrong. I saw a lot of advice and suggestions on how I should approach this situation. I agree that I need to completely cut off contact with my parents, because their constant indecision is exhausting and starting to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they have constantly shown that Vicky is always their first priority. My parents are selfish, and I have known this for a long time. However, how can a daughter simply stop loving her parents? It's much easier said than done, but it's very difficult to actually do. However, for the sake of my mental health, I have no other choice but to do this so that I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. Sorry for the lack of updates in the last month, but I have been very busy with my wedding. First of all, yes, my wedding was quite good with my grandfather by my side as I walked down the aisle. Despite the absence of my parents, I couldn't have been happier, exchanging vows with Rob, promising to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced all night, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to maintain a connection with your high school friends, because sometimes they become your chosen family. During the reception, I felt a slight pain, realizing that my parents were not there to share this special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I found comfort in knowing that I had made the right choice for myself, prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that has carried us through good and bad times. In the days after the wedding, Rob and I went on our honeymoon, which his parents paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days just relaxing and enjoying time with my husband. I feel so excited every time I look at Rob and realize that he is now married to me. As I mentioned earlier, I have completely cut off all contact with my parents, blocking them everywhere. I didn't even bother to send them an explanation because, honestly, they don't even deserve it. I don't know if Vicky actually had a housewarming party that day, or if it was just an excuse for my parents not to attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I wish them and their favorite daughter only the best. Update 3. I wasn't planning to share more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know. I haven't checked my email in the last month due to my wedding and honeymoon, but today, while checking my emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found my email address, and I was surprised by this. I haven't opened it yet, but I think I will. I will let you know what it says.